Yo, everybody. Happy Monday. Call it Survival Monday, according to Gary. That's exactly what it is. This is the Traded Black Podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Hope you all had a good weekend. Hope you got a chance to see some of the content from Friday. It was a really good conversation with Frank Colombo and Anthony Cogniglio on key metrics. Cash flow is going to be king this earnings season. We talked a lot about look at the bigger companies. They equate to almost 70% of allocation with MSOs ETF right now. There's reasons why that is happening and why institutions are going to look at the overall financial health of the big companies once they indeed enter into this space. We'll get into that in just a moment. Also here today, we're going to talk about Germany. Last week, we had Finn Hansel on from Sanity Group. Today, Jamie Pearson. She actually specializes in the German market. She's a former CEO of the edibles brand Bang, and she's got a lot of knowledge about the German market, how prescriptions are basically prescribed, but the biggest difference between the German market and how it works versus the American market. So we're going to find that out. So let's welcome in an old friend back to the show.
What's going on?
Hello, Dad.
What's going on? It's nice to be back after the week off.
How's it
after
going?
the week off last week? Good.
Everybody's probably
Good.
happy to see you here. You get much sleep?
This week, yes. Last week, no.
No?
So, no. It was nice 3 nights in the hospital of 0 sleep.
Yeah. And everything's good. Everything's healthy. Baby's good. Mom's good.
Everything is great. She's eating like a horse and sleeping decent amount, which is nice.
That's awesome.
So knock on wood.
In-laws
so far.
In-laws on their way. I assume you're going to get probably a lot of family knocking on the door coming to see you.
Yeah, my parents will be here Friday for 2 weeks.
Well, congrats again. And it's great to have you back because I know there was a lot of, there was the big three, Verano, GTI, Trulieve all reported last week. And we got some key takeaways. Kim was on obviously last Thursday and she had some good things to talk about.
Yeah.
And GTI, as we said, and you mentioned this on Twitter last week, just how they're built different, but very impressive with what they did. Rather interesting take that Ben had on Twitter afterwards, but you can understand that he's basically saying, I want to separate myself from the pack and realize we don't need rescheduling. But man, oh man, you got to be impressed with what they continue to produce. But what do you think as far as the takeaways from their latest report?
So he doesn't need rescheduling.
Yeah.
I don't think he's wrong. I think that he was correct in his assumption that assertion that the DEA is corrupt. The DEA are corrupt. We saw their behavior in the ALJ hearing. GTI's balance sheet kind of spoke for itself.
Mm-hmm.
Their performance over the quarter kind of spoke for itself. Ben, I don't want to say he's on an island because I do think that it's going to take a village and we're going to need all of the executives here to come together to really get things moving and get reform done. But Ben's pretty much on an island. I mean, Ben's calling his own shots. I don't think he has anything to worry about. I mean, he can weather the storm. Kim, fat margins again. I think her gross margin was 62%. Obviously, the numbers were a little bit, I don't want to say distorted, but all over the place due to the Yes on 3 campaign coming in Q4. I know there were some questions around her tax liability. Kim had very sophisticated tax attorneys and her CFOs on calls a couple quarters ago. I've got pretty good faith that she knows what she's doing as it relates to her balance sheet, the tax liability on the business, and how she's running the P&L. Her earnings were solid. She's obviously cemented herself in that pole position right along with Ben. Verano, they had a giant loss. Earnings were, I don't want to say lackluster, but they were down with the bright spot of they have started to recapture, not started to, but they have recaptured their market share in Florida. They saw degradation in Florida quarter over quarter starting in Q3 of last year. They're back on track in Florida. Florida's going to be they're going to live or die by Florida.
Yeah.
Florida's going to be able to breathe life into that balance sheet and or kill it. Their stock got hammered today. I think they finished down 16%, and I mean it's down to 74 cents, which is it's just kind of crazy to see. $264 million market cap. So Verano, I mean, obviously they're getting no love. A lot of people also are speculating is the cannabis selling out their shares that they got in that deal for Virginia. I'm not too sure about the unlocks, but I'm sure that'll come to light here sooner or later with selling pressure in the market. It was decent. Mixed bag from the top three. Curaleaf should be reporting here anytime now with the earnings call.
Just in 331.1 million in revenue, just under estimate of 332 million. 75.8 adjusted EBITDA. Estimation was 75.5 million. Gap was
Gross
160.
profit, light, operating income,
157.4 million gross profit, estimation of 163.3. So
net
it looks like
income came in. Yeah,
they're
I mean, it's a jumbled mess right there trying to read what Guap is putting in. I mean, it's much appreciated, but I'll have to go through the numbers and listen to Boris on the call. I'm sure there'll be some justification somewhere around there, and he'll kind of set the tone for what's moving forward. But that being said, I mean, cannabis stocks got hammered today. There were a lot of double-digit names, double-digit red names across the entire sector.
yeah.
Pearson, Verano, Trulieve actually was bucking the trend with relative strength. They were flat on the day. So we'll see what goes. Like I said, let's see what the earnings call says and see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can get Boris on Wednesday to run us through the numbers.
That's what we're trying to do right now. So keep you posted on that. We've got Jim Cacioppo from Juicy that's going to be on Friday, along with Anthony Cogniglio. So that'll be interesting. I thought it was interesting, and we already know this a lot, but 70% of the MSOs ETF allocation is towards the big MSOs. But if anything, you can understand right now that, history is repeating itself. I talked to Matt Hawkins a week ago. This is a year that you're going to see basically the gap become even wider. And I don't necessarily know if it's going to be the top 5. You look at a few of the companies right now, and they're really starting to separate themselves from the pack, which is clearly happening. And I know we all, kind of fantasize the idea of institutions coming in and how they're just going to spread everything across the board. That's not going to be the case, especially from the takeaway I got from Frank and Anthony on Friday, just some of the dialogue that they were sharing, that they will look at the big players. They will look at the financial health. Cash flow will become king. And if they do start to spread across the sector to be in some sort of roll up to give them access across the actual industry. But look at the big companies is basically the message that I heard loud and clear from both of them. And why not when you look at these numbers, especially from Trulieve and GTI?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And I think a name that doesn't get enough recognition is Glasshouse. I mean, Glasshouse had that financing today. They refied a large part of their debt, blew it out until 2030. The first 3 years of the facility is not interest bearing. So I think they're saving around $13.1 million during the next 3 years in interest payments, if I'm not mistaken. And I mean, it's a 8.65% coupon on the facility. It's great financing. They did it. They refied it. Graham and Kyle doing a great job, obviously, with Glasshouse. And I mean, Glasshouse is one of the names that really doesn't get brought up in the tier one conversation. But I mean, they are fundamentally built to last in this industry. And I mean, I think that was a testament to the strength of the business today, was landing that financing.
Well, one thing I found interesting too is what was it, 43 million share buyback that, GTI did when they announced their earnings, which grabs a lot of people's attention. Ben knows the prospectus of his company better than anyone, as Frank said on Friday as well. But also mentioned and highlighted on the flip side is Glasshouse, why they would be selling basically their stock right now, being at a valuation that is a lot higher than industry standards. But I thought that was interesting. But good job, obviously, with Glasshouse, what they did at the rate that they did. And like you said, when you're referring to some of the stuff related to the cannabis, that they didn't have to give away 25% of their company. But the word on the street and the consensus on the street was that job well done by the people at the cannabis. We're hoping to get Jesse and David on here in the near future. I know some of you have reached out, but at the end of the day, it had to get done. Otherwise, what would have been the other solution, or at least the alternative, right?
Correct. The cannabis didn't have any other options.
Yeah.
They had to do that refi. I know it's heavy. It's heavily dilutive if everything comes to fruition, but I mean, they didn't have any other choice.
So if this is a trend we see, could we see another Air Part 2 where this gets pushed out even more from 2026? And if so, what do you think, in a lot of ways, investors should be mindful and aware of if that were indeed happening?
I think that question is going to be answered when Air reports later this week.
Yeah.
I think seeing the financial health of the business and seeing fundamentally what they did in Q4, how some of those numbers are going to start to bleed in. How's Ohio doing? How their other markets doing? Is Florida still performing for them? It's going to be, because there needs to be an appetite to refi the debt. That was a very big lift that David got finished when he was at the helm at Air. We'll see what happens moving forward, but I think the numbers will be telling this quarter. They don't need to do it anytime soon. I think it's 2027 that it got pushed out to. Or no, it's December 2020. No, I'm correct. Correct there. It's December 2026 that their debt got pushed out to. 2030 is now where Glasshouse is.
Justin, appreciate the feedback. Man, I got called out last week. A lot of the Tilray lovers are saying, why do I always ignore that company? Look, they got a big German footprint, and I think they've got a great footprint. As far as, where this company goes from here, I think they got a lot of right pieces in place and a lot of great assets. There's just one thing that is staring me right in the eye. It's the 900 million shares that are outstanding. That's got to be addressed eventually.
I mean, the stock's at 68 cents, and I mean, it gets they rampant with dilution on a quarterly basis. I mean, if they're sure there's a lot to like, but I mean, there's also some fundamental flaws in Tilray. So I mean, it's
just being a realist.
Not here nor there. Yeah. And also keep in mind, like, they do have flower and they do have domestic production in Germany. All of the Canadian LPs are exporting all of their flower to Germany right now.
I know.
I mean, there might be price compression. There might be some supply and demand dynamics that take shape in Germany. And I don't think you should be betting your investment thesis for Tilray on Germany, if I'm just being honest. And the stock has done nothing but go down.
Yeah. We're actually going to be working closely with the new company, Rubicon Organics. And I know a lot of you are familiar with them, but Margaret had some interesting information just about the Canadian landscape with us recently, Anthony, where she really talked about, and I know we've learned this, about how the Canadian market, there's a shortage of supply because all these companies are allocating their focus on the international and European market. But we're also hearing rumors that as far as the Canadian government and the companies allowing a lot of this product on shelves, it's not going to be easier said than done for the companies that have left the country that are looking to get their product back in, creating those who stayed in Canada a great opportunity. We'll find out more. We'll hope to have her on later this week. And I know you've got a grin on your face because it's like nothing like driving a huge excise tax with no execution, not being there for your businesses. They have nothing really to what options do you have in that particular situation? And then
I mean, I don't know if that personifies the way the companies are doing business right now in Canada, but I mean, I think that notion is ridiculous. If the OCS and Health Canada are going to start to reward companies that are staying domestic, you drove them overseas with the onerous excise tax. You drove them overseas with policies that needed to be that needed to be redone years ago. The excise tax is ridiculous. The excise tax is, I would argue that to an extent, it's more onerous than 280E. Yeah, it's up there. So good. The fact that you now drove an industry that you had pole position on abroad because of just the complete lack of refining the policies that you built around the industry from implementation is ridiculous. And that being said, I don't want to say that detracts from, let's say, Village or Rubicon. They do have very good products that are resonating with consumers in the Canadian market. But to say that you're going to give them precedent or give them priority over another LP that just happens to be exporting, like, you caused that problem.
Yep. And they're both.
If anything, I'd be incentivizing the LPs that are exporting to come back into the domestic market, 100%. Not the other way around.
100%.
Yeah,
that's a good point. And it's a country that's about to get hit with tariffs beginning, was it tomorrow?
I think tomorrow. Yeah, I think Donald said it's tomorrow. Mexico and Canada will get hit with tariffs.
Yeah. One of the great interviews I had last week, as I said off the top, was Finn Hansel from Sanity Group. Learned a lot about Germany and just about the emerging industry, and the amount of registered medical patients has grown from 250,000 to 800,000 in the last 11 months. And it appears it could be just getting started, because as much as 10% of Germany's population is already consuming cannabis, which gives you an idea, especially if the regulated market, from a cost perspective, and their import licenses that Germany has, is cheaper than the illicit market. But we want to go a step further and understand the whole political framework, but in addition to that, how it works, and give some comparisons between Germany and the US. So with that, let's welcome in our next guest. Name is Jamie Pearson, who is actually an international consultant and former CEO of Bang, the edible company. Good to meet you, and welcome to the live stream for the first time. Oh, I think you're on mute, Jamie. All good.
Oh, I figured you were in control.
How's things? Good?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Yeah, we got introduced from you. The team at Trulieve actually got us connected last week and said, look, if you guys want to talk about Germany, definitely Jamie is one person to speak with. But you got a chance to see, actually, we were talking offline here before the interview earlier today about how you saw my interview with Finn. And we were talking about just how telemedicine is exploding as far as how it works with prescribing medical cannabis. But before we get ahead of ourselves, maybe off the top, because I know Anthony had some good points as to how you have to be registered and have a card in America, but how does the actual process work in Germany to become a medical patient that's different to say what goes on in the US?
Well, I think the first thing that your listeners need to really understand is that they need to take their North American lens off, because the medical cannabis, the way it works in the US, we put air quotes around medical. What we did is created a parallel industry that had nothing to do with our healthcare industry in the United States. In Germany, they integrated the medical industry right into their healthcare industry. So there is no getting a card. You don't become a medical patient. You're just a person. You have an ailment. You go to the doctor. You get a prescription. You go to the pharmacy with that prescription. You get it filled. You get your cannabis. And in many cases now, it's evolved over time, that prescription is covered by the single payer healthcare insurance. So it's like you're getting your birth control or your Adderall or your, whatever your medicine is. It's just part of their healthcare system.
So very much physicians are controlling the whole process. Am I understanding that correctly?
The physician controls everything. Yes.
So how does it work? Is there like an
Gotcha.
online form that you have to fill out? Like, how does it work to start the process, especially with the element of telemedicine? Because I found it interesting that this stuff can be delivered through Uber Eats within a half an hour, which you can understand why it's growing so much, but maybe elaborate a little bit off of that.
Well, what I'll tell the listeners, you can go to a website called Flowz, FLOWZZ.com. What Flowz does, the reason I like that particular website is it allows me to compare the same type of product amongst different suppliers. And I start with what cannabis I want to purchase.
Okay.
Which is interesting. So I'm shopping for cannabis. I just did it today to see if an American could actually go through the process and get their cannabis delivered through the medical system. So what I did is I went to Flowz. I picked the cannabis I wanted. From there, of course, when you go, you have to get your account, which is just basically your email and your password. So I didn't have to upload identification. I didn't have to do any of that. So then you go in, get your cannabis picked out, and then it says, which pharmacy do you want to use? Oh, there's 10 here, but these 6 don't have the one that you picked.
Okay.
Only these 4 have the one that you picked. You pick the one closest to you because conceivably you want to have it delivered to you, through the mail or through Uber Eats or whatever it is. And then you fill out the questionnaire from the doctor. And it says, what are you suffering from? And the first choice is chronic pain. And basically I answered about 5 questions. They want to know if I have any mental illness, if I've had any, reactions to cannabis in the past. Am I being treated by a physician? I answered no to everything. I'm not being treated by a physician. I don't have any mental ailments, et cetera, et cetera. Boom, done. Paid for the visit, which was 13 euros. And then it said, this worked. You'll hear in 24 hours whether the doctor, approved your prescription. When the doctor approves your prescription, you decide how you want it delivered to you. And so it is effectively what I would equate it to is Viagra or minoxidil or hormone replacement therapy or Ozempic in the United States, all Schedule III drugs.
Okay.
It functions just like a Schedule III drug in the United States, integrated right into their healthcare system.
Now, with the way that it's integrated, do you think that there are any sort of key learnings that the U.S. market could learn from what's going on in Germany, or do you think that we've gotten so far ahead of ourselves with the way that we've modeled this market here that integrating that type of system would kind of be counterintuitive to what we're seeing, especially with the dispensary model that's currently in the States?
Well, it's hard to say because I wouldn't say that we've gotten too far ahead of ourselves necessarily. What I will say is that I think a lot of Americans expected medical cannabis to go through the healthcare system and not to be a completely separate place. And I do believe that there are dispensaries in the United States where they feel very medical. And, my mother or grandma would be fine going in there. But then you also have dispensaries that don't feel very medical. And, it just depends on what kind of experience you want to have. I would say medical clinics don't follow that model. You generally go to the doctor. They all kind of feel the same, very antiseptic, and you go to the pharmacy. So I feel like if we had initially treated cannabis the way Germany did, we would not be having the problems we have now. But you have to remember, you have big pharma, big alcohol, and big tobacco that have been kind of pushing the rock against us rather than in the same direction as us all these years. And, those are giant lobbies that we have to contend with, and they're hedging. So
do you not see that in Germany though? Because what I find staggering is they have as many as 10% of the country's population consuming cannabis. That's a big fat number, but you can understand the growth potential. But why don't they, I guess, run into the same situations like it does here in America? How does that work?
Well, the big bad wolf of socialized medicine that we are all fearing in the United States, it actually works really well over in Europe. And, the majority of citizens there enjoy free healthcare. You go to the doctor, you go to the dentist, you go to the pharmacy. It's all part of the taxes that you pay.
Right.
And because of that, the government is negotiating on behalf of its citizens with these pharmaceutical companies. They just don't have the power in Europe to the degree, believe me, they have power, but not to the degree that they have in the United States. Our political system is bought and paid for by big business because of Citizens United. And until that gets fixed, every lobby is going to just control whatever senator or congressperson they purchase.
Yeah. And you learn
how's the sentiment around cannabis in Germany? Is it socially acceptable? Are you seeing it as widely accepted as, let's say, in the United States? How is it seen within the German society?
There's definitely a stigma, just like there is in the U.S. The U.S. has come a long way. I sometimes forget that people have anti-cannabis views, I think, because I live in the cannabis bubble. But in Germany, it's definitely, roll back 10 years. It's like it was in the U.S. 10 years ago.
Well, when I was in Colombia, you couldn't even say the word. It's like you get thrown in jail and that's got a long ways to go before there's any change there. But I get it. But as I said before, you got 10% of the country's population. Finn was saying that, look, I can't believe the growth, 250,000 to 800,000 medical patients registered within an 11-month span. But do you agree with a lot of his sentiment that we're just getting started, that there's tremendous growth opportunity? And do you see a lot of those people being converted into the regulated market in the next, I don't want to give a timeline, but eventually?
Well, do the math. Absolutely. When you think about it, if 10% of the German population is using cannabis, and that's the number that the government reports, I would suspect that that's probably higher. It's probably closer to 15%, but let's just say that number's correct. You have 85 million people. That's 8.5 million people, and you only have 800,000 people in the medical market right now. Where are the other 7 million or 7.5 million? They're purchasing from the illicit market, or they're part of social clubs, but there's not that many. They barely got a few of them licensed, so they're in the illicit market. So what you really have is the government understanding that cannabis is being used, that the citizens are reporting that they're using it, that it's definitely in their country. And it's a victory when you realize that because of imports, because you were able to import product that is produced at a cheaper level than someone could produce in a European country where energy is very expensive, and they bring it in from places where energy is very cheap,
right?
Then they can actually bring in product at a price that can compete with the illicit market. And in fact, it's cheaper to buy cannabis off of especially if the government's paying for it through the prescription system. And imagine if your whole life, the government has always paid for your medicine and you're using cannabis to sleep or for anxiety or for epilepsy for your child. You have no intention of pulling your discretionary dollars out of your pocket. So the Germans are expecting the government to cover those prescriptions, and they expect the doctors to understand how to prescribe the medicine.
Is it taxed
You mentioned.
in Germany? Oh, sorry, Anthony.
Well,
I was going to say you. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Go ahead, Anthony.
Anthony.
I was going to say you'd mentioned the social clubs. Is there any misconceptions you think that the U.S. audience perceives when they hear social clubs? And what's the dynamic within Germany as it relates to them? Because I've seen the ones and been to the ones in Spain, and I mean they seem more like a California style consumption lounge.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you mind if we put a pin in that question, and I'll answer Shad's question, which is about taxation.
Yeah.
The government's not going to tax itself, right? It's paying for these medications. So the medicinal cannabis isn't taxed like an adult use product would be. And that's one of the reasons why everyone's pretty bullish that the pilot programs for adult use are still going to happen for two reasons mainly. One is that it's going to generate some tax revenue, and also because it's designed to collect data. All of these pilot programs are being done through the university system with a very, very prescribed data collection methodology. And so I think what the German government's doing, and I think it's smart, is they say, before we're going to publish our final adult use regulations, we're going to let the political dust settle. And we're also going to figure out what is actually happening from a data standpoint, because we need to give these doctors some comfort around where are the drug interactions, where are some of those things where doctors have some concerns, and I think legitimately. But going back to your question, Anthony, the social club model, it invokes this idea that people are hanging out around being social. That's not it at all. It has no consumption element to it in the respect of there's a bricks and mortar bar, just like in Spain, and you go sit and, roll a joint and socialize with your friends. That's not it. It is more of a social cooperative growing model. So there's a social club can have up to 500 members.
Okay.
You're only allowed to be a member of one club. There are some ambiguities in those rules. Can the clubs stack each other and go buy a big warehouse together? Can they grow together and then rent out parts of the facility? All of that's still being fleshed out. There's some people that think that the social club model is going to go away now that the CDU won the election. And some people, that is kind of one of those gray areas. We don't know what's going to happen with the social clubs.
Does it matter if the medical, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but is the focal point in the growth opportunity not on the medical side?
Well, I mean, yes, I think the biggest market in Germany is definitely the medical market.
Yeah.
But there are people who want to use cannabis instead of alcohol. For example, the big explosion we've had in the United States with the low-dose hemp-derived THC beverage, which is just dominating the alt bev category in the United States. They're ready for it in Germany as well. It's a big beer drinking country, of course. But the youth are also like American youth. They're not interested in putting poison in their body. I think you're starting to see that plant-based medicine revolution also hit Europe. Frankly, I think there's big opportunity for the beverage companies to head to Europe as well.
Who would have thought? I thought I was right about everything for my generation, right? But here we are. People like different things. Go ahead, Anthony.
I was going to say, we're seeing a proliferation of hemp in the United States. Are you seeing the same level of sophistication and just widespread products as it relates to, let's say, Delta 8, Delta 9, THCP? Are you seeing all of those in the German market as well, just like we're seeing them in the States, or is it more limited?
It's exactly the same. If not, it's more prolific in Europe, I would say.
Really?
Okay.
I would equate Europe to the South. I was shocked. I live in Montana. Montana's a legal market. I spent a lot of time with Bang in California, legal market. All these places that I'm going and cannabis is legal. And I knew there was no cannabis in the South. And then I went to a wedding in Nashville and it was legal THC. I could buy it in 7-Eleven. And I was like, what is going on? I didn't realize how, and this was a few years ago, of course, but I didn't realize how that loophole had been exploited to the degree that it had been exploited in this sort of red state, blue state division. And boy, howdy, they have legal cannabis in the South and they have it in Europe. Same thing.
It's wild. So if in the German market, if your insurance is covering it, it's cheaper than the illicit market, and let's say probably the over-the-counter hemp products as well. Why are consumers still turning to the illicit market or consuming the hemp products? Is it a function of just optionality and sophistication of the products that are being offered within the German market?
Well, there's a couple of things, and I think there's no difference in the citizens of Germany are skeptical about wanting to put their name all over the internet and attach it to cannabis, right? Or even with the stigma going into their doctor and having those conversations. And also, not all of the doctors are really willing to prescribe it. So my mother-in-law's doctor has never brought it up to her, and she would be a perfect candidate for cannabis, and they're not about it yet. And there's still a lot of education that has to happen within the medical field. So what you basically have are companies like Flows, like Bloomwell, that have exploited the loophole and figured out what was legal, what was possible, and made it easy to compete with the illicit market. The other thing I would say is habit. If you've always gotten your cannabis from a certain person or from a certain supply, why invite the government into something that works perfectly well? And I think there's just going to take some time to change those habits.
Do you think the government will eventually, in due time in Germany, educate and try to change the look and, I guess, stigma of cannabis? Like in a lot of ways, from the stories I've heard out of Portugal about how they decriminalized every single drug, and now they view people that are homeless in a lot different light, that they have a mental health issue, which I applaud, obviously, a country like that and getting behind it and educating their people. Has there been any talks about this? You know, obviously there's a new election. The dust needs to settle. We don't really know what's going to happen here in the short-term future, but eventually, do you think that's something that Germany would do?
Well, when you had the traffic light coalition and you basically had all left-leaning political parties, you know, they were very, very robustly in favor of cannabis for all the reasons that many of us are. Now you're dealing with the CDU, and it's, you kind of got to start over. The new coalition has to be formed, and new understandings have to be formed. And I think what's been really clear is that the SPD has no intention of letting that cannabis rule go. It's going to be their leverage and negotiation on all the other issues that Germany's worried about, the economy and the war and, you know, all the things.
There's a lot of things right now that are going on. Go ahead, Anthony.
Is not the only, I hate to use that word, but is one of the only ways that, let's say, CanG and the cannabis industry in Germany can take a step back is if for some strange reason the CFD coalesces with the AFD, which they've said is not going to happen, and they create that coalition within the government to move something back. I'm assuming the SPD, it's a non-starter to roll back any sort of cannabis regulations that they implemented themselves the last time around.
Well, the beauty of the German political system is it requires people are going to have to negotiate and give up. Everyone's going to have to be unhappy at some, you know, that's the sign of a great negotiation is when everyone leaves a little bit upset. You know, I personally like to find win-wins, and I think there are always win-wins if you're, you know, really looking for them. But there's so many complex issues, especially with what just happened with Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, really putting pressure on Europe to step up in that the Ukraine situation. There's so much going on that cannabis kind of doesn't. I don't know where it rates, but I don't think it's very high.
Well, we have the same problem in the United States now with rescheduling and the cannabis initiatives. There's so much other stuff going on that it's just a function of it is very low on the totem pole as far as priorities go.
I think the only thing that really is in its favor is it's the only really new bucket of money that these governments can rely on, where before they're like, we want to put it in defense. No, we want to put it in education. And it's a dollar that just keeps seesawing back and forth between whatever party's priorities. But now we can say, we want to pluck that dollar away from organized crime and put it in our coffers. And we haven't seen an opportunity like that, especially post-COVID. It's coming at a really good time. that might actually increase its importance, for these governments.
So you're president of a company called New Holland Group, and your LinkedIn title basically says you're international strategic management consultant. Lived in Montana, CEO of edible company Bang. Great relationships with a number of companies, in the American landscape. And now you're overseas. Is that kind of like the wrong turn down the right road? How did you end up overseas?
Well, that actually started when I was with Bang.
Was it?
Yeah, I'm married, or was married to a German, and our kids are dual citizens. I met him when I was living in Germany. I speak fluent German. I was going back and forth for the last 25 years. So it was really low hanging fruit for me to go to the German conferences and see kind of what was going on. Okay. And I found an entree for Bang to get into the German market because there was a real demand for that CBD product over there. And plus we were a brand that everybody recognized, globally. So it just was kind of a weird lining up of the moons, and it worked in my favor.
Was it a nice move? Do you look back now and say, like, learned a lot, obviously, but I'm assuming that it's nice to see proper political framework towards a cannabis program actually built up from the ground up, which is nice to see, right?
It's nice to see companies making money and not, beating their head against the wall. It's pretty refreshing. And they, of course, the Germans ask them, they'll tell you they have it bad, but, let's go to California and drop it in that market and we'll see what they think.
Right.
Yeah.
Who would have thought, right, Anthony?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Selling cannabis is supposed to be profitable.
Well, the one thing I think you guys might find interesting is the owner of ICBC, his name's Alex Rogers. ICBC is the International Cannabis Business Conference.
Okay.
They've been in existence since about 2014, 2013. The first time I spoke at a conference in Germany was that conference. And I was on stage right before Ralph Mashawam, which I had no idea who he was at the time. And I'm kicking myself. I could have taken a photo or got his autograph. But when I was at that conference, what I realize now is that market was, getting ready to go. And Alex had a lot of foresight in creating a market it really was a market that didn't exist yet. And he just sort of created a platform for people to come together. He just did this again and created a company called the Tallman House. Okay. It's really interesting because the Tallman House is a private members only investors club. And you name it, Finn Hensel will be there. Cornelius from Demacan, all the big players in the German market, the MSOs, so to speak, we call them MCOs, multi-country organizations. They're all in the room. And then they have a pitch contest, Shark Tank like pitch contest. 4 or 5 or 6 companies come pitch. They have sharks in the room because what's going on is investors are gun shy now because of all the, the fallout that's happened, in North America. But there's a lot of pent up demand and a lot of interest, especially in the German pharmaceutical market and especially in what's going on with these pilot programs. And so Alex created this Tallman House, and it's incredible watching that explode because he gave a forum for investors to come together and really vet these pitches.
So
it sounds like what we had back in the day with ArcView.
It's similar to ArcView.
Back in the early stages of the industry.
He's just not forming a fund. He's, and in fact, Gene Sullivan from ArcView is one of the advisors of the Tallman. And, he's not trying to have a fund at all. He's really just providing a platform for these portfolio companies to come in and in a very structured way to seek investment.
Lots to learn about this market, but it's an interesting one. But you live in where do you live now overseas?
Well, I live in Montana. And
you live in Montana still? Okay.
Yeah, I live in Montana. I'm overseas 3 months at a time. So I'm 3 months in Europe, a month home, 3 months in Europe, a month home. Okay. And it's been like that for a while. So because when I'm in Europe, I'm everywhere. I'm in Barcelona. The pilot program, I have a client in the Swiss pilot program. I have a client in the Dutch pilot program. I have a Barcelona seed company that's a client. So I'm kind of bouncing around all over Europe.
What's the famous bumper sticker they have in Montana after the show Yellowstone? Everybody's trying to move there.
We're full, but I hear North Dakota's.
I'm sure real estate's done very well there since COVID in that show, right?
I'm not complaining.
Yeah, I'm sure. Jamie, listen, I appreciate you. Let's have you on regularly because I'd like to learn more about the German market. But this is great. But I appreciate your experience of what you learned over there and getting from the first source as to how this all works and how things are viewed over there. But no better person to have that on that actually lives it and is there and actually in person. But appreciate you checking in and thanks for the feedback. Okay.
Happy to be here. Come back anytime. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yep. Bye.
Yeah. Interesting about those social clubs that you were bringing up. So 500 members, it's like people from all over can't just come and wait up in a line. You got to obviously qualify and you got to be, I think, sponsored or at least recommended by somebody to become a member.
It's essentially an organized distribution network.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that there's no infrastructure. There's no consumption lounge. There's no, it's a club that collected. It's cannabis collective.
Yeah. Similar to like a Soho in some ways. No,
not anything like a Soho.
Okay. Just pretend I never brought that up.
Soho's got infrastructure. We've been to them all.
True. Good point.
Soho's got the infrastructure. The core of Soho is the infrastructure.
Glad I brought that up. All right. Moving on now. All right. That wraps up segment number 1. And I hope you guys all had a great time. And now it's time for Insider's Edge presented by Attach. Here we go. Back here, Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales, with Anthony Varrell. Let's bring in our Monday feature and a very good friend of the podcast, Michael Bronstein. Good to see you. Biggest smile in cannabis. Good to see you, my friend. How are things?
Great to see you.
Yes.
How's it going, sir?
How are things? Good? What'd you think of that little debate with Zelensky and Trump? Did you think we're going to get a boxing match in the Oval Office? That was intense, was it not?
Listen, I was just waiting, after they did that, I was wondering what the Eagles visit was going to look like. We're still waiting to plan for that.
No, they declined. Didn't they?
I don't think they did. I mean, the story was first that they declined. Now it's like maybe they'll go. And then I saw the meeting and I was like, I think you got to go.
You got to go.
You have to
go.
Like, even if you put politics aside, I don't care who's in the White House. If they invite me to go to the White House to celebrate the championship I just won, I'll shake a hand and enjoy it. It's an experience.
You go. You bring the trophy. What are you
doing?
Yeah. And they have extra food now that was sitting around that I read about afterwards that wasn't used.
Oh, from the Zelensky presser that got canceled. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh man, I saw some of the AI videos that were going out when they were talking, and all of a sudden the fist came off, and I'm like, that's exactly what everybody was thinking in their heads as to how this.
Did you see the SNL? Did you see the SNL skit
with?
I just saw the head
with Mike Myers.
Oh, dude, it's hilarious. Mike Myers was Elon Musk, and then Marco Rubio and JD Vance. It was amazing. It was a good cold open for.
Check
for
that
SNL.
out. Yeah, that's when SNL was great. Early '90s, right, Michael?
I remember the early '90s SNL.
Sandler,
I stayed up late for it.
Sandler, Chris Farley, who they say was the funniest. God bless him, rest in peace. Chris Rock, Dana Carvey, David Spade. Like, you go on. Phil Hartman, rest in peace as well. Tragic how he passed away in the late 90s. But anyways, I'm showing my age right now. And then Mike Myers graduated high school and went straight to an audition at Second City before actually going to the celebration of his friends that were partying that night. But that's why he is where he is. But listen, wanted to have you on. I know we were on last Monday and we talked about how this type of conversation regarding adult use cannabis is really starting to pick up a lot of momentum in the Senate in Pennsylvania. That, yes, we talked about, Governor Shapiro, saying all the right things. And Anthony, to your point, when you posted on our newsletter about a week and a half ago, but he's ready to roll out the green carpet. So we've had you on, is there any updates from last Monday? Is there anything pertaining to how the negotiations are going? Have they started? What are you hearing? What can you tell us?
Budget hearings are just finishing up this week. So in earnest, I think after that legislative session will come back in towards the end of the month. And what we've seen even over this last week in the hearings is we've seen the Secretary of Agriculture in Pennsylvania, where the adult use program would be housed under the governor's proposal, come out and say some pretty meaningful things about the implementation of the program. So the secretary had said that, look, they're ready to start this program, that the Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania is uniquely suited to be able to do it. And then the other thing that we saw the Secretary of Revenue say that the governor was, the administration was putting together a bill and policy that they would be releasing in the near future. So the hearings itself, I think, to anybody who is even a casual observer, saw that these hearings went way further, and this budget goes way further than it has over the last couple of years. And the other thing, the big tell to me, is that in order really to have this budget operational and be able to get where it needs to go, cannabis legalization has to be a part of it. And that's why we saw cannabis legalization become such a major component of the hearings. I mean, they were really talking about it in ways, and I said this last week, in ways that they never have before. But the plans that they outlined were taken really seriously in the legislature, to the extent that we saw Republicans come out, Senate Republicans, a couple of them, really dissecting the proposal, some of them outright just hitting the proposal, right? And we saw some others just question and say, hey, these things are pretty well thought out. It seems like we're ready to go. And one of the things that we've noticed is that even people who are against cannabis legalization in the legislators who are playing right now like it could happen in the state, right? Which I think is a very different thing than what we've seen in the last couple of years. What we really saw is they'd come out and they'd say, we have health concerns over this. Now is not the right time, right? We're not gonna see it. So I think that this March, we are marching towards a June deadline here for the budget, with cannabis legalization very much in play right now.
Well, when you
is the biggest point around this the fact that you're surrounded now by adult use states, and because that seems to be what I've picked up on with these political campaigns, these political fights. There's really one statement that kind of resonates, like in Florida when DeSantis came out with Amendment 3 and was like, "We're not going to make Florida California." I was like, "Shit, he figured it out." And then when I think it was like 2 weeks ago, there was someone that came out and said, well, there's no path forward. And then someone came over the top and said, guys, I think it was Governor Shapiro, guys, we're surrounded by adult use cannabis states. That revenue is valuable. Pennsylvanians are leaving the state to go purchase cannabis. It's time to make this industry legit and be able to utilize that tax revenue. Is that one of the strongest points that you're seeing at least resonate in the conversation?
I think it's probably the strongest. I think it's so to legislators, it's the strongest point as to why they're going to vote for this as part of a budget proposal. And even last year, you had Governor Shapiro stand in front of the legislature during his address, and he said it again this year, is that he doesn't want to lose to, in his words, frickin' Ohio. Yeah. Right. That he was tired of it. And he made the case this year, and he said that, he said something very similar. And when we saw him say that, I was like, well, the game here is on. I mean, this is very forceful. This is very forceful language from the governor, and the proposal that they've outlined during the budget has fallen into a bucket of where you'd see a serious proposal. Now the fees are excessive. The tax rate is not there yet, right? But I think that one of the things that it does is it shows that they're setting up for an actual negotiation coming into the budget period. Because remember, this was never going to be, you have a split, you've got a Republican Senate, you've got a Democratic House, and you've got a Democratic governor. They were not going to come into a budget negotiation saying we agree on everything when we walk in. That's not the nature of these negotiations. So it's where can they get, and these states everybody knows. You go in and you talk to these legislators. If they're on any portion of a border state, they're like, look, my residents are driving over. Okay. And even add to that argument, when Pennsylvania legalized gaming, they legalized casino gaming years ago. The argument that won the day was that Pennsylvania was losing tax revenue that they could have to New Jersey.
New
right?
Jersey, big market.
And that
big
was
market.
that was the thing that won. And it was a lot of the same argument.
What's the population? I think Jersey's got what, 10 million people?
I feel like there's more when I ride around the state.
Yeah. 10 million people. And I think it's a $5 billion market for sports betting.
Are you still, Michael, are you still seeing any of those odd sticking points, such as like state-run stores or anything like that? Or has that noise kind of gotten filtered out?
No, I think that we're going to, yeah, it's a great question. I think that, Democrats in the House are very much still discussing the state store model and idea. And I think that mostly in the state, people know that is not what the final negotiation is going to include. Yeah. But I think that there is a not unreasonable chance that we see a proposal over the next couple weeks. Certainly could be by the end of this month, where a state store bill or a bill with a state store component is likely to be introduced on the House side. So I think that there is going to be a lot of discussion when and if that comes up. But there is definitely still discussion in the state and certainly on the House side of that idea.
When's the last time you saw a governor in Pennsylvania put together adult use cannabis revenue in their budget, right? And I think that's a telling sign to see where this could potentially go. But all signs point in the right direction. It's just a matter of what we can see with some of these negotiations is what the fine print will look like the next couple of months, right?
Yeah, and look, I still think, and this is it's going to play out in a very Pennsylvania political way, right? Like the state store discussion really has more to do with, an organized labor component. Because when we talk about alcohol, which is sold in the state stores in Pennsylvania, one of the things is that it's actually the state stores, the liquor stores are organized by unions. And so a lot of the liquor discussion is actually that discussion by abstentia, which is why you sort of see political lines being drawn around that discussion. So that's why when people look at the state from the outside, it's really why they don't understand why there might be a proposal to begin with that starts out with a state store component to it.
That makes sense.
You also highlighted ATTACH stands for American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp, and that you're seeing a lot of hemp bills being introduced on the state level. These are popping up more and more. So what does this mean, I guess, these bills being popped up and the effect it could have on, let's say, the cannabis industry? What's being discussed or what's being presented, really?
And we've been actively campaigning in a number of different states. And, just even today, Chris Lindsay, who's our director of state policy, is down in Florida on a number of bills that are cropping up. We've seen Texas, seen Missouri, right? So there's right now there is this is probably the biggest issue that's coming up, certainly in state legislatures, but also one of the biggest federal issues we see discussed right now, especially as we see more market entrants into the into the hemp space. And one of the things that I think that has been a real clear line through a lot of these pieces of legislation is the synthetic derivative THC products,
Mhm.
right? Where there's really people in legislatures do not feel comfortable about those products on the market, right? They do not feel, and we heard from the previous conversation, basically what we've had is this proliferation of synthetic products that masquerade as hemp products, and sometimes to consumers look like they're indistinguishable to natural cannabis products. So, in Florida, where you guys are at, obviously it was, where Anthony is at. I don't know where you're at today. It looks like an undisclosed location, but
in Florida.
possibly Florida. Okay, possibly Florida.
I hope to be in Florida.
there are a couple, there was a committee meeting that was called this week to be able to figure out what it is that they're going to do about hemp derived products in Florida. Texas, we've seen some very restrictive bills that have been released, one of which is moving, which would essentially create non-detectable THC levels in products. And then, we're seeing in Missouri legislation that creates a beverage carve out, basically a low dose beverage carve out, and wipes clean the synthetic discussion. I actually think that what you're going to see going forward, what we have seen is that mostly every time a legislature has been introducing new bills, they wind up with more restrictions on the marketplace, and folks who are making these synthetic THC products are basically fighting any level of regulation that we see in the market. I think it's a very turbulent marketplace. I mean, we've heard very turbulent. I mean, because from an investment thesis standpoint, there's incredible opportunity, but really what you're betting on is sort of a blue sky, non-regulated landscape to bring in, to bring in other folks into it. And to be sure, the beverage category is a very interesting category. We have a beverage council at Attach, and we've been looking at those regulations for quite some time. But the synthetic THC derivative market, right, is really, really concerning. Is really concerning to folks. And really what we should be doing, you've heard me say this before, is we should really be legalizing natural THC. I mean, all of the other stuff. I mean, it's just
how practical is that? How practical is that, though?
I mean, it's the most practical, actually.
I get it
because Michael, I mean, you're seeing all these bills firsthand. You're talking to these government officials and these governing bodies. The bills are great, but have you actually had a very direct conversation with any of these politicians or governing bodies as per enforcement? Because the hemp industry is a big industry right now. These bills sound great. I support most of them, but just looking around and kind of surveying the landscape with what the hemp industry has become, it's easier to just legalize the stuff than to go enforce all of this stuff. It's going to take so much manpower to enforce all of these bans on these products because they're everywhere right now that it just seems almost impossible.
Legalizing marijuana, and natural products.
Yep.
If that is the end result of what happens here, and regulation, that is a good end result in certain states.
We win.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that is a thing. The problem that we have though right now is that this marketplace is really pushing the bounds of regulation and moving in some directions much further than what I think politicians really want to see. Mm-hmm. Okay. So in Texas, some of the things that we're seeing in Texas, you're going to see, I think, a lot of pushback because as an industry, right, one of the things that we have to do as an industry is if we are producing a product, it has to be safe. It has to, what is on the label actually has to be in the product. Okay. Yeah. And we really have to look at the public health and safety of a consumer. And we don't really know. I mean, a lot of folks, and we as an industry really, I think, need to continue to message this, because natural marijuana, okay, natural THC, and these products, that's not the issue.
No, not at all.
It's not the issue at all. We're all looking for we're all looking for regulation. We're looking for proper channels, and we're looking for the ability for businesses to succeed on this level. But a lot of the people who are selling these synthetic derivatives don't even understand what products they are selling, and they don't care, or they don't care, right? Or they don't care about it,
Right.
or they're willfully misleading the consumer or regulators.
Brian,
Yeah, I mean, I found out what 7-OH is this weekend, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's an alkaloid derivative of kratom.
Yeah.
That Cheech and Chong are actually selling labeled ludes, which on the product description guarantees some deep euphoric feeling that, from what I can see on Reddit, I had a lot of time on my hands with the baby, so I was just reading this weekend. You can literally see where this is going to go, and the way that kids are getting these 7-OH tabs and getting these products, they mimic opiates. And you know what's going to happen when 7-OH gets banned? If something else doesn't pop up that's as accessible, they're going to go to the fentanyl dealers on the street because they're addicted to this stuff. They're addicted to this stuff. This stuff is bad news.
Wow.
Some of these things we don't even know, these molecules,
Correct.
we don't even know if they're actually in the plant. Like, people are arguing that they're in the plant, and some of the ones that you look at are not in the plant. Okay. Yeah. Delta 8, right? We see that in the plant, right? But when you start really moving down towards what's being sold as a quote unquote hemp product, where it couldn't actually be made, okay, it couldn't actually be other than man-made. And there are a lot of these molecules that are out there. Essentially what you're doing is you're developing something that's closer to a synthetic drug market than you are a marijuana market. And we're calling it hemp. And I think that is we're all going to get into trouble if we continue to, and when I say we all, I mean, marijuana,
everyone,
everybody. Okay.
Adam Terry
put into the same bucket.
Adam Terry from Cantrip was on a couple of months back. And when we started talking about synthetics, if memory serves me right, he's got a chemical engineering degree by trade. And he was saying, when you look at these synthetics, there are certain free radicals that come to be in the synthesis process. There are heavy metals that get introduced as a byproduct of some of these molecules being made. We have no idea how those interact with the body, nor do we have any idea what's actually in the substance when they're getting to these THCPs and HHCs and THC zeros that they're just creating out of thin air. And it is a consumer safety hazard.
The thing that's wild is people are like, okay, well, these products, we should be allowed to sell them because, like, it hasn't been that injurious to a consumer.
It's a ridiculous argument. Yeah.
It's a bad argument, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like, if we were like the tobacco industry, it's not like you smoke one cigarette and you fall over or something.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's actually like continued use of some of those things. And like, the thing is, as an industry, we can't be scared of, we're not out there arguing that marijuana is the healthiest substance on earth. There are medical uses for it. Okay. There are important medical uses for it. And adults should be able to make the choice to be able to use the product.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. But when we start making arguments around things that we don't necessarily know about, that's the thing that gets other industries into trouble. Okay. Right. And when we start producing things in a laboratory outside of a plant, all right, we can run into a whole host of issues, because the further that you move away from it, the more likelihood it is that you're going to have problems.
My biggest negative on the synthetics is that there's going to be something that happens, gets national exposure, a child is injured, or something to the nature of being something catastrophic happens.
Yeah. And
it's going to get grouped in with state-run cannabis businesses. We're all going to get grouped into that one bucket because something happened. THC molecules were involved, and no one knows the difference between any of the products, especially the mass media.
Great example was when it happened to Juul. How many years ago was that?
It was a while, but yeah, the vitamin E acetate scandal that was big with vapes.
Killed it
in the cannabis space.
Yeah. All right, my friend, this has been good as usual. I just got an email, and Abigail Spanberger is actually leading by double digits right now in that race for governor come fall. So I learned some news this week that over the last 30 years in Virginia, this is the way it's played out. They've always had 2 Dems win back-to-back, fall by 1 Republican. Then it goes back to 2 Dems, 1 Republican. And that's repeated itself for the past 30 years. So if history repeats itself, it looks like with that lead, she may be the next governor. Is that November, I assume, is when the next election is for governor? Yeah.
That's correct.
Anyway, I know I went off topic there about Pennsylvania, but I know you like politics, but it's something that you do. But listen, always appreciate, and we'll see you back here next Monday for Insider's Edge presented by Attach.
Looking forward to it. Good to
Thanks,
be here.
Michael.
See you, Michael.
Yeah, so interesting. I bet you some players like Jushi is obviously a big footprint. Verano footprint.
Cannabis.
The cannabis as well.
I think Cresco's in VA. I think Cresco's in VA too.
Yeah. We'll learn more about that. We're going to, as I said before, have their CEO from Jushi, Jim Cacioppo, on Friday morning at 11 a.m. to talk about their latest earnings. And we could probably highlight a few things that we just touched on with Michael pertaining to Pennsylvania, what he's seeing and hearing, because I know Trent, that we've had on a couple times, very well-connected person, and has his ear to the ground on a number of things. But don't look now, but I think it's 18 of their 40 dispensaries across the country are actually located in Pennsylvania. So if that were to flip, you start to look at specific companies that would have, really benefit from that. That company comes to mind along with the usual players, but that's a big footprint in the Pennsylvania market. But always interesting. Anyway, welcome back. Hope you got your first show under your belt and feel good after being back, being a dad. We'll be back here on Wednesday. We're trying to get Boris on, so we'll keep everyone posted if we hear back from the Curaleaf team to talk about their latest earnings. And then again, Friday, the Jushi earnings. I do know that we've put some feelers out there for Jason and the gang at Pearson. They report Thursday.
Yeah.
Market. Yeah. Okay.
Jason reports the 6th. Air Wellness also reports the 6th.
Also, there's a couple people that made some comments about Canopy Growth and their At the Market program that they announced this morning. I know a lot of tons of people have reached out to ask what next. They want to know what this means. Again, I'll repeat myself. We are working hard to get through to that management team and get them on, because I know a lot of people have some questions, knowing that Luke's hasn't really done, I don't think, an interview yet with anyone. So people just want to get a chance to know who he is and get a chance to know him a little bit better. But again, we'll keep you posted. We're doing what we can right now. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and some great takes. If you want to get a full recap and analysis and key takeaways of Curaleaf's earnings, make sure to scan that QR code and subscribe to our Baked In newsletter, which is delivered to your inbox tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time. Welcome back, my friend. Good to have you back. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here Wednesday, okay?
See ya.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Now, that was a good one. What'd you guys all think? Did you like what we had to say here today? Do you agree, disagree with what we're saying? Love to get your feedback. As usual, leave comments below. Trade to Black is growing, and we wouldn't have done it without you. So if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple and Spotify for the audio version. And as usual, leave lots of comments. We, as I said, love to hear back from you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.